what if I told you that the most devastating strike you can deliver is silence? In a world where everyone rushes to defend themselves, to argue, to justify, the one who stays quiet holds an invisible blade. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. Words reveal intentions, but silence forces others to reveal theirs. Think about it. How many conflicts have escalated simply because someone couldn't resist responding? Yet those who master silence create fear, confusion, and curiosity without moving a muscle. In silence lies the ability to turn an enemy's impatience against them, to watch them stumble into traps of their own making. Today, we will uncover how to weaponize silence, as Machiavelli did, striking back without a single word, and proving that the loudest voice is not always the strongest. Why does silence disturb people so deeply? At first glance, it seems harmless, just the absence of words. Yet in truth, silence is never empty. It is a mirror, a void into which others pour their fears, insecurities, and doubts. When you refuse to speak, you deny your opponent clarity. And in that fog of uncertainty, their imagination becomes their worst enemy. They begin to wonder, what is he thinking? Why is he not responding? Is he planning something I cannot see? The silence becomes louder than any argument. Psychologists have long noted that human beings are uncomfortable with gaps in conversation. Silence creates tension, pressure, and an almost primal urge to break it. That urge often leads to mistakes. When one side remains composed and silent, the other scrambles to fill the void, revealing too much, showing weakness, or even destroying their own position. Have you noticed how in negotiations, the one who speaks less usually secures more? The silence works like an invisible hand, pushing the other person into overexposure. Machiavelli himself understood this dynamic. He wrote that rulers should learn when to conceal their thoughts, for a leader who reveals everything through words is easily manipulated. Consider the court intrigues of Renaissance Italy. Those who stayed silent, listening rather than speaking, were often the ones who survived the longest. Words can be twisted, remembered, and used against you. Silence, on the other hand, cannot be weaponized by others, only by you. History is full of examples where silence intimidated more than speeches ever could. Take the case of Charles the Martyr, the Holy Roman Emperor. When faced with rebellious nobles, he often responded, not with fiery words, but with a cold, measured silence during assemblies. That silence conveyed disdain, control, and inevitability. The nobles left the chamber not with a clear promise, but with dread, imagining punishments far worse than what he might have actually planned. Silence gave him leverage that words would have ruined. But let's look beyond the throne rooms of history. In everyday life, the same principle applies. Imagine a heated argument. One person shouts, accuses, and demands answers. The other simply looks at them calmly and says nothing. Who appears weaker? Not the silent one. On the contrary, the outburst exposes desperation, while the silence radiates strength. In that moment, the one who remains quiet demonstrates mastery, not only over their tongue, but also over their emotions. And emotional control is the ultimate sign of power. The true psychology of silence lies in its paradox. It feels passive, yet it forces action. It looks weak, yet it inspires fear. It hides your position while exposing theirs. By saying nothing, you control everything. People will analyze your silence, endlessly offering you more power than any speech could deliver. And here's the subtle irony. Sometimes silence is not even strategic, but your enemy will assume it is, and that assumption alone can break them. So the question is this: are you strong enough to resist the temptation of words? Can you let silence do the striking for you? Because silence, when sharpened into a weapon, doesn't just withhold. It conquers. And this leads us to the next step. If silence can unsettle the mind, how can it also serve as a shield, protecting you from manipulation and attack? In the game of power, words are often traps. They invite you to react, to reveal, to commit. And once spoken words cannot be taken back. They become evidence ammunition and chains that bind you to a position. This is why Machiavelli advised rulers to master the art of concealment. And what better shield is there than silence? When you remain silent, you deny your enemies the weapon they seek, your voice. Think about it. Politicians are destroyed, not by what they keep hidden, but by what slips from their mouths. Leaders fall not because of their secrets, but because of their statements. Silence shields you from these dangers. It protects you from being misunderstood, misquoted, or manipulated. Have you ever wondered why the most cunning figures in history rarely spoke at length? Because they understood that restraint is armor. Take, for example, the trial of Galileo. Forced to defend his discoveries, he was pressed again and again by the Inquisition. Yet in the end, it was not his silence that condemned him, but his words. His statements, twisted and dissected, became tools to break him. Contrast this with the countless rulers who chose silence when cornered by accusations. Their refusal to respond left their enemies frustrated, unable to pin them down. Silence becomes a fog in which arrows lose their direction. In negotiations, silence shields you from overcommitment. When someone pushes for an answer, the pressure builds with every second you do not respond. They begin to interpret your quiet as calculation, as hidden knowledge. They adjust their own position, often softening it just to fill the unbearable silence. By holding back, you allow them to expose their hand, while you reveal nothing. Silence, in this sense, is not absence, it is defense. But let's step deeper. Silence does not only shield you from external attack, it shields you from yourself. How many times have people destroyed their reputation in a moment of anger, blurting out words they later regretted? Silence breaks that cycle. It gives you space, time, and control. The one who can remain silent in the face of provocation is unassailable. Words betray emotions, but silence masks them. That mask is your shield against those who would exploit your weakness. Consider the Cold War a battlefield, not of armies, but of words, threats, and posturing. The United States and the Soviet Union often engaged in fiery rhetoric, yet the most dangerous moments came in silence. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, both sides sent signals, but it was the calculated pauses, the refusal to respond instantly, that forced the other to second guess. A single silent delay could mean hesitation strategy or hidden strength. That uncertainty was its own form of protection. Even in personal relationships, silence acts as a shield. Imagine an argument where accusations are hurled at you. The instinct is to defend, to explain, to justify. But every defense you give provides more material for attack. When you remain silent, however, you give nothing. The aggressor grows uneasy. They wonder if they struck the right chord, if they have truly reached you. In their uncertainty, their assault weakens. The shield of silence holds firm. But does this mean silence is always passive? Not at all. In truth, silence is an active shield. It requires discipline, restraint, and strength. It is easy to lash out, easy to argue, easy to speak. What is hard is to stand still, to let the storm of words crash around you while you remain untouchable. That kind of silence is not weakness, it is proof of power. And power, Machiavelli reminds us, belongs to those who control themselves first. So the question becomes, are you wielding silence as a shield, or are you letting words betray you? Because every time you choose silence, you are protecting not just your position, but your authority, your reputation, your image of strength. And yet a shield is only half the story. Silence does not only defend, it can also strike. It can unsettle enemies, force mistakes, and break down resistance without a single word. In the next part, we will uncover how silence transforms from passive defense into an active weapon, one sharper than any sword. If silence can shield you, what happens when you turn that shield outward, when you use it not just to defend, but to strike? Here lies the darker genius of Machiavelli's insight. Silence is not merely the absence of sound. It is a blade hidden in the shadows, ready to cut without warning. When words are withheld strategically, they can wound more deeply than any insult, provoke more fear than any threat, and dismantle enemies without you lifting a hand. Think about the nature of human interaction. People expect responses. They expect confirmation, denial, anger, or reassurance. When they are denied these, their minds race. Silence compels them to imagine, and imagination is often crueler than reality. The enemy begins to doubt themselves. Did I go too far? Are they plotting revenge? Why haven't they responded? Every unanswered question gnaws at them like a poison, and the longer you withhold your voice, the sharper the pain becomes. Silence transforms from defense into offense. It destabilizes, weakens, and conquers. One of the most powerful demonstrations of silence as a weapon can be found in diplomacy. Consider the art of negotiations between rival states. Sometimes, a single unreturned message can send ripples of panic through the opposition. A delay in response might make generals wonder if troops are moving or if alliances are shifting. During World War II, Winston Churchill often used silence strategically. By withholding immediate reactions, he forced his enemies, and sometimes even his allies, to reveal their anxieties first. His silence made them speak more, explain more, and ultimately expose their positions. But history offers even darker examples. In the brutal courts of Renaissance Italy, a ruler's silence could be more terrifying than his threats. When a noble begged for mercy and was met with nothing but a cold, unreadable stare, the silence itself became a sentence. Words might have left room for hope. Silence extinguished it. Those rulers understood that the imagination of fear always paints punishments worse than reality. Why waste breath making threats when silence can make your enemy tremble more? In personal power struggles, silence operates the same way. Imagine a subordinate who defies their superior expecting a confrontation. But instead of anger, the superior offers silence. No recognition, no reaction. That absence is worse than a scolding. It leaves the subordinate suspended in uncertainty, constantly guessing what unseen consequences might come. Silence becomes the invisible lash that keeps them obedient. Even in everyday life, silence can be a devastating weapon. Think of relationships where someone withdraws their words not out of weakness, but as a calculated move. The silent treatment, when used deliberately, is not just emotional distance, it is control. It forces the other person to break, to chase, to overcompensate. And in that imbalance of power, the one who withholds words dominates the one who begs for them. Machiavelli would have smiled at this tactic. Why fight openly when silence makes the other side destroy themselves? But perhaps the most lethal edge of silence lies in its ability to expose. When you refuse to speak, your opponent often grows desperate to fill the void. They will over-explain, reveal secrets, or expose insecurities, all without you saying a single word. Lawyers use this tactic in cross-examinations. They ask a short-cutting question, and then fall silent, letting the witness unravel themselves. That silence becomes the executioner's blade, and the victim does the work on their own. Yet silence as a weapon requires precision. Used carelessly, it risks being mistaken for weakness or indifference. But used strategically timed at moments of tension, it becomes lethal. Silence after an insult. Silence after a threat. Silence in the middle of a heated exchange. These moments magnify its impact. To master silence is to know when the absence of words carries more weight than words ever could. So ask yourself, do you wield silence passively, or do you wield it as a blade? Are you letting silence merely protect you, or are you using it to cut into the minds of others, forcing them to bleed out their own fears and mistakes? Because Machiavelli's lesson is clear, power does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers nothing at all, and that nothingness terrifies more than any shout. But silence alone is not enough. To truly dominate, you must know where to apply it in the world of politics, business, and personal relationships. In the next section, we will explore how silence operates in modern power games and why those who master it remain untouchable in today's world. Silence may have terrified nobles in the courts of Renaissance Italy, but does it still hold the same power today? The answer is yes, perhaps more than ever. In an age of constant noise, endless opinions, and rapid communication, silence is no longer common. It is rare, unsettling, and therefore powerful. To remain silent in a world addicted to words is to wield an advantage that few can match. Consider the battlefield of business negotiations. Every entrepreneur, every executive knows the tension of waiting for the other side to speak. When one side lays out an offer and the other remains silent, the pressure mounts second by second. The speaker begins to doubt their own position. Was the offer too weak? Did I reveal too much? Should I sweeten the deal? More often than not, they talk themselves into concessions. The one who masters silence secures more without giving away anything. Silence here is not weakness, it is leverage. The same principle applies in leadership. Think of great CEOs or political figures. The ones who rush to comment on every issue quickly dilute their authority. Their words become predictable, almost disposable. But the leader who chooses silence strategically, who delays responses, who withholds statements, creates an aura of mystery. Their silence sparks speculation, commands attention, and forces others to interpret every gesture. In this way, silence amplifies presence. You speak less, but you are heard more. In the realm of politics, silence is often the strongest move. A public figure under attack who resists the urge to respond immediately denies their opponent's satisfaction. The attackers grow frustrated, their accusations echo into emptiness, and eventually the silence itself makes them look desperate. And when the response finally comes, it lands with 10 times the weight. The pause gives words the gravity of a hammer strike. But silence is not confined to boardrooms and parliaments. It thrives in personal dynamics too. In relationships, the one who reacts emotionally is often the one who loses control. The one who stays calm, who withholds words in the heat of conflict, retains dominance. Silence in arguments shifts the balance of power. It forces the other person to confront themselves, to question their own behavior, to spiral in uncertainty. What could be more Machiavellian than defeating your opponent without lifting a finger, letting them unravel under the weight of your silence? Technology has only amplified this effect. Think about the tension created by a text message left unanswered. Hours pass, then a day. The absence of response speaks louder than any reply. Silence in digital communication becomes a weapon sharper than words, making the recipient wonder if they've been dismissed, ignored, or strategically tested. Machiavelli never knew smartphones, but he would have understood this instinctively. The power of silence only grows when others are desperate for feedback. Yet modern silence is not only about withholding, it's about timing. Strategic pauses in public speaking, for example, often captivate an audience more than the words themselves. A pause before a critical statement forces listeners to lean in, to hold their breath, to give the speaker full attention. Great orators, from Martin Luther King Jr. to Steve Jobs, understood that silence is not the absence of voice, but the sharpening of it. Every pause is a blade that makes the next word cut deeper. So ask yourself, in your daily life, are you squandering your power by speaking too quickly too often? Or are you harnessing silence to control the pace of the game? Because in the modern world, whether in business, politics, or personal relationships, the one who dares to remain silent commands the stage. But beware, silence is not invincible. Used at the wrong time, it can be misread as weakness or cowardice. That is why the art of silence must be balanced with action. And that brings us to the next question. When does silence backfire? And how can you wield it without letting it turn against you? Every weapon has two edges, and silence is no exception. Wielded with precision, it unsettles enemies, commands respect, and shields you from traps. But wielded carelessly, it can turn against you. Machiavelli himself warned that the appearance of weakness is as dangerous as weakness itself. Silence, when misunderstood, can create exactly that appearance. The first danger is misinterpretation. Silence leaves a void, and people will fill that void with their own assumptions. Sometimes those assumptions empower you, but other times they work against you. If you remain silent too long in a negotiation, the other side might decide you are indecisive or unprepared. If you stay silent during a public scandal, silence can look like guilt rather than strength. The same tool that once shielded you can suddenly become a confession. History offers painful reminders of this. Consider Richard Nixon during the Watergate scandal. His initial silence was intended as control, as dignity in the face of accusations. But the longer he avoided speaking, the more the public assumed he was hiding something. The silence that was meant to protect his power instead eroded it. Words, when finally spoken, came too late. The silence had already judged him guilty. The second danger lies in relationships of trust. Silence may be powerful against enemies, but in alliances, partnerships, and personal bonds, it can breed suspicion. A ruler who never speaks risks alienating allies who crave reassurance. A partner who withdraws into silence during conflict may appear cold, uncaring, or detached. What was meant as strategy becomes a wedge that drives people away. In the pursuit of power, one must remember that silence builds fear, but it can also build distance. And distance is dangerous when you need loyalty. Another trap of silence is paralysis. There are moments when words or decisive actions are required. To remain silent when boldness is demanded can mark you as weak. Imagine a leader during a crisis when the people cry out for direction. If he remains silent, waiting too long, the people will not read his silence as wisdom, but as cowardice. Machiavelli cautioned that rulers must not only inspire fear, but also confidence. Silence alone cannot inspire confidence. It must be balanced with action at the right time. Even in personal power games, silence overused becomes predictable. The silent treatment, when applied, constantly loses its sting. It stops being a weapon and turns into a sign of emotional immaturity. What once made others uneasy becomes routine, even tiresome. Power is not found in repetition, but in precision. A blade dulls when swung recklessly. Silence dulls when wielded without timing. Modern examples make this clear. In politics, a candidate who dodges questions with silence too often is branded evasive. In business, a leader who avoids communication in the name of strategy risks losing the trust of employees. And in relationships, Silence without explanation easily morphs into emotional abandonment. In each case, silence does not build strength, it corrodes it. So how does one prevent silence from backfiring? The answer lies in balance and context. Silence must be chosen, not defaulted. It must come across as deliberate, not accidental. The key is to pair silence with occasional decisive speech or action, so that when you do speak, every word strikes like lightning. A ruler, a negotiator, a partner who knows when to stay silent and when to speak gains the best of both worlds. Mystery without weakness, control without detachment. The truth is simple: silence is never neutral. It always speaks even without words. The question is, what does it say about you? Strength, control, calculation, or weakness, guilt, indifference? That is the razor's edge on which silence rests. And here lies the final lesson. Silence is not the strategy, it is a strategy. It cannot stand alone forever. To dominate the game of power, silence must be woven with deception, action, and timing. Only then does it transform from a temporary trick into a permanent advantage. So now we arrive at the ultimate moment. How do we close this lesson on silence? And what is the greater truth? Machiavelli leaves us with: silence is never just silence. It is presence, without sound, authority, without explanation, and power, without effort. Machiavelli understood this timeless truth. Words may reveal, but silence conceals, and in concealment lies control. Throughout history, rulers, generals, and leaders who mastered the art of silence struck harder than those who shouted. They let their enemies unravel in the void, let allies lean in closer, and let the world mistake restraint for mystery. And mystery and power is often stronger than clarity. We have seen silence as a psychological weapon, as a shield, as a sword, and as a stage on which modern power games are still played. But we have also seen its dangers: misinterpretation, mistrust, and paralysis. The true strategist knows when to withhold and when to speak. Like a blade, silence must be sharpened by precision, not dulled by overuse. It is not the absence of action, it is action disguised. So the question is, can you resist the urge to fill the air with words? Can you let silence do the striking for you, while others stumble in their own noise? Because those who master silence do not need to shout to be heard. They do not need to fight to win. Their silence becomes the battlefield itself, and in that battlefield, they are already victorious. Now, if this exploration of Machiavelli's silent strategy has stirred something in you, take a moment to act. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever used silence to your advantage, or seen it turn against someone? Your stories are part of this larger game. And if you want to sharpen your mind with more strategies of power, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and join me on the next journey. Because today we have seen how silence can conquer. But what happens when silence is not enough, when you must deceive, manipulate, and strike in ways your enemy cannot see? That, my friend, is where Machiavelli's next lesson begins.